Hi, I'm Judith Royle, and I am in Sedona, Arizona, soon to come home in 5 or 6 weeks. The time has gone so quickly. And if you happen to be on, would you please pop up so I can say hello to you? So, we have been talking over the last few weeks about our core wounds. And when you think about the readings and the clearings that soul genesis practitioners do, they have a plethora of information. But one of the pieces of the puzzle that I think is the most helpful to understand is the core wounds. And that's what we've been talking about. We've been talking about abandonment, betrayal, struggle, displacement. And today we're going to be talking about isolation. And you'll see that in the heading I said, do you think the best part of having gifts and talents is sharing them with others? Then why don't we? In other words, why do we take ourselves out as a pattern, as a way of doing things and how we live our lives? And so actually it's used as a coping mechanism in many ways. This person who has the core wound of isolation will do anything to avoid confrontation. They'll avoid it at all costs. So what happens when you don't speak your truth or take a stand and stick up for yourself? Well, quite often your emotions get suppressed. And then all of a sudden they come back up, they bubble to the surface, and kaboom! We've got a response that didn't necessarily warrant the situation. And now to give a really good example of how isolation can affect our lives, I was watching American Idol the other night. And I'm not sure how many of you out there watch American Idol, but I was watching this one particular contestant. And he was so humble. He had his head down the whole time. He could hardly maintain eye contact with anyone, but he had the most engaging smile. And he explained that he had only been into music the last 3 or 4 years, and he was self-taught. So before he started to perform, we all thought, well, this is just somebody that is trying. Well, it was amazing. What an accomplished guitar player he was. The song he had written himself was absolutely outstanding. He just blew everybody away. And so here is his person who has hidden behind his core wound of isolation. He's kept himself in his little bubble all his life. But here the universe has provided a wonderful opportunity for him to stand in his power and his light. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see him go quite far in this competition. And darned if I can't remember his name, but I'll look it up later. So who do we have here? Well, hi, Magali. Oh, and Mark Brown, I haven't seen you in ages. I'm so glad you joined. And Colleen. So we have a little bit of Newfoundland and a little bit of Ontario. And I'm sure that some of you who have this core wound, it's no surprise to you. But this way, we're looking at ways to sort of compensate and actually to see how it actually works for you. So think about someone, let's say in the teen years, because we can really relate to this in our high school years. There is a group that we really want to belong to, and we would just love to belong to that, because they rule, so to speak. And even as adults, we know of certain groups that rule. And it's not necessarily for the highest good of all. Sometimes that this group has rules, certain ways of doing things that most people don't agree with. But once you get a large group with a number of people, they think that they have power because there are many who think the same thing. But as one of my mentors said to me one time, stupid is stupid. And it doesn't matter how many are in the group, it still is the same. It's still not in the highest good. So the person with the core wound of isolation, they can remove themselves from that group in the blink of an eye and not feel anything. So it's not important to them to be a part of that group. So in that way, isolation does work for you. If you have any questions, please make sure that you write them down. I'd love to take a stab at answering them. Someone just said here, one of my biggest issues is self-sabotage, and how he does that is by isolating himself. And whenever our ego steps in and says, I think you're getting too far out of your comfort zone, sometimes it's in our best interest to make friends with our ego and say, look, I really need to do this. I need to do this because I need to know and show how powerful I am. So sometimes it's a matter of just talking yourself out of it. And I often think that by having a group around you, and I would be willing to bet that even though your core wound is isolation, you have a support network for yourself. And so they're often very good at giving you the nudge or the prod. I kid my students. I say I've got a cattle prod under the table. My silly sense of humor. But sometimes you need that nudge from somebody else too. So use that nudge and follow through on it. And sometimes you just have to, as you jump into a pool, hold your nose and just jump in and hope for the best. Sometimes isolation feels easier than trying to connect with others. Yes. Yes, because we have to put ourselves out there, and the one thing we don't want to do is draw attention to ourselves. But it's interesting, when we talk about these core wounds as being part of our soul's origination, each lifetime we are peeling the layers of the onion of these core wounds. And so it's the universe providing us with opportunities to do that healing. And if we don't make an effort, guess what? It ends up right in your face. And so you are forced to do it, sometimes when you're not ready, sometimes when you're taken off guard, but the universe will challenge you, because that's what we're supposed to do, is be the best possible version of ourselves. And how can we do that if we're hiding? I think of kids as they're growing up. If there's a lot of dissension in the house, a lot of arguing and bickering, they'll hang out in their room and lock their door, and then that's their little world, and that's how they avoid the stress in the household. And so that's how they use their isolation core wound to help them out. And if you've ever listened to some of the songs that came from people with that particular core wound, for example, All by Myself, and I Am a Rock, I'm an Island, or you can think of all kinds of songs that is about someone trying to come out and trying to stand in their power. And the best way they can do it is with their music. And what was it that Wayne Dyer said? Don't die with the music still in you. I think it was something like that. If there are any other questions here. Someone was asking about intense responses. And usually we get intense responses when we've ignored it, we've shoved it under the rug, or pretended it wasn't there. And then something happens to force us to take a look at it. And so all those times that we didn't pay attention to it, they add up, and then all of a sudden it explodes. So trying to deal with these things as they come up is the best possible way to deal with it. And of course, I'm one to talk. How many times have I talked about trying to avoid things by saying, I can't do this? And